When we look back at their careers, who will be the better player, Mark Vientos or Francisco Alvarez? We're going to talk about that and more on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. For big upsets, the game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. New customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed, win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. If we go back to the 2023 season, there was a point, I want to say it was maybe April or May, somewhere there in the beginning of the season, where the Mets were struggling, and I think Mark Vientos got a big walk-off hit. And after the game, Francisco Lindor dubbed the young group of Mark Vientos, Brett Baty, and Francisco Alvarez the Baby Mets. I got this shirt to prove it was a thing, but it did not last long because the Baby Mets largely underperformed in 2023, which turned into a disaster of a year. The one exception was Francisco Alvarez, who hit 25 home runs and handled a veteran pitching staff. But Brett Baty and Mark Vientos, they really struggled. They were no longer prospects, and their status was pretty dismal when it came to how fans viewed them and just what expectations could be moving forward going into the upcoming season. 2024, things changed in a drastic way for Mark Vientos, as now, if we look at the young core of the New York Mets, Mark Vientos might be the face of it. You can make a case that Mark Vientos is the third most important player on the New York Mets heading into the 2025 season. Obviously, Juan Soto's number one, Francisco Lindor number two, probably Mark Vientos number three, especially if they don't bring back Pete Alonso. They need Mark Vientos to be the guy he was last year over a full season when he played 111 games. They need him to do what he did over 155 games, hit 30 to 40 home runs and drive in 100. There are big expectations put on Vientos right now. So if I was to ask the audience today, of the formerly known Baby Mets, who's going to have the best career? I think 90% of the audience would say Mark Vientos. But if I polled the audience a year ago, after Vientos and Baty largely struggled, I think the audience would have said Francisco Alvarez, and Ronnie Mauricio might have been second, because Mauricio had a good year in AAA and didn't have enough time in the big leagues to show a big sample size of struggle. I've been covering this team since 2019, which is pretty much when all of these guys entered the organization. Vientos was already there. Alvarez was already there. I believe Mauricio was there as well. Brett Baty was drafted that year in 2019. So I have watched these guys through their development, and I've learned a lot about trying to cover prospects through watching them. What I will tell you is development for young players, it's not linear. It's not just a steady climb. There's peaks, there's valleys. It is really tough to navigate a baseball season. And some years are going to be better than others. So if you look at those four players, four guys that used to be the top prospect list for the New York Mets, and you follow their journey, it hasn't always been clear cut who is going to be the best. Looking at Baseball America's preseason rankings of the top prospects in the Met system, we can sort of see a pretty clear picture of, for one, who was always considered the best, but also the fluctuation that still exists. So going into 2022, this is before COVID shut down that season, Ronnie Mauricio was the number one prospect in the Met system according to Baseball America. Francisco Alvarez was 2, Brett Baty was 3, Matt Allen was 4. That's right, Matt Allen, who still hasn't really pitched. Andres Jimenez was 5. Mark Vientos was 6. David Peterson was 10th, ranked behind Thomas Szapucki and Kevin Smith, neither of which have made an MLB impact up to this point now as we sit here in 2025. But again, a faulty game looking at prospect rankings. 2020, there's no season for the minor leagues. David Peterson and Andres Gimenez make a big league impact. You look at the rankings heading into 2021, Alvarez was 1, Mauricio was 2. So kind of funny how that switched based on, I guess, scouts looking at, I don't know if they got some footage of the, what was it called? The alternate site? I don't know how Alvarez got above Mauricio between that year, but he did. Matt Allen was 3. Pete Crow Armstrong, who was drafted in 2020, was ranked 4th. Beatty 5th. Vientos 6th. JT Ginn, who was drafted, I believe, in the same draft as Pete Crow Armstrong, he was 7th. Peterson, despite all the success he had in the big leagues, was 8th. Pre-2022, this is the rankings we got after the 2021 season when all these guys had a full year in the minor leagues. Francisco Alvarez was still number 1. Brett Beatty had jumped up to number 2, leapfrogging both Mauricio and Vientos. Mauricio got ahead of Vientos. He was 3rd. Vientos was 4. Matt Allen was 5. So going into 2022, you had 1 through 4, Alvarez, Beatty, Mauricio, Vientos. All those guys right there. What happened in 2021 that led to those rankings? Well, Francisco Alvarez in 2021, he was Babe Ruth in Port St. Lucie for 15 games. Then he spent 84 games in Brooklyn, hit 22 home runs, had an 889 OPS. Baseball America ranked him going into the 2022 season as the 13th best prospect in all of baseball. Beatty was ranked 39th by Baseball America heading into 2022. That's after a 2021 season where he posted a 911 OPS in AAA. Excuse me, in high A. Jeez. Yeah, he was not in AAA that year. In Brooklyn, he had a 911 OPS. Got up to AA, had a 787 OPS. Didn't really hit for much power that year. High average, high on base. Was hitting the ball into the ground a lot. Sounds familiar when you're talking about Beatty. Mauricio was ranked 92nd by Baseball America in the top 100. He played 100 games in Brooklyn, had a 740 OPS, hit 19 home runs. Then he went up to AA for a cup of coffee, had 8 games up there, had an 815 OPS. The one guy that was not ranked ever in any top 100 by any outlet other than us, where I work at Just Baseball, we're the only outlet that ever had Mark Vientos on a top 100 list. I think it was near the end of that list. Actually, you know, it might have been in the high 70s. Something in my head's ringing that it was like 78th. It doesn't matter. But regardless, Mark Vientos, that season, look at his numbers. It's crazy he wasn't ranked, and it shows you sometimes the faults in prospect grading because we focus so much on the glove. When it came to the bat, Mark Vientos had a 927 OPS in AA, hit 22 home runs, drove in 59, then played 11 games in AAA, where he hit 3 more bombs. So he finished the year with 25 home runs in just 83 games played. Yet he was not ranked anywhere. When it came to OPS, he was the leader of the pack, but not in the top 100. He was ranked behind the other 3 guys, and again, largely because of his defense. Going into 2023, after the 2022 season, Francisco Alvarez was still number 1 in the Mets top prospect list. Kodai Senga, Baseball America does rank international signings. He was number 2. Beatty 3. Kevin Parada 4. Alex Ramirez 5. Jet Williams 6. Mark Vientos 7. Ronnie Mauricio 8th. When it came to the top 100, they had Alvarez at 9. They had Beatty at 33. There was multiple other outlets that had Beatty in the top 20, and MLB Pipeline had him at 21. And there was actually multiple outlets that had Francisco Alvarez as a top 5 prospect in all of baseball. Why was he ranked so high? In 2022, Francisco Alvarez had a 922 OPS in AA. That was in 67 games. And by the way, I should have mentioned this for anyone who doesn't know what OPS means. OPS is on base plus slugging. So that's what that stat means. So he had 18 home runs in those 67 games, 922 OPS, makes it up to AAA for 45 games, hit 9 home runs, had an 825 OPS. Meanwhile, Brett Beatty had his best season ever, 950 OPS in AA. He was the best hitter in that league. Made a brief cameo in AAA, then got up to the big leagues before he had a thumb injury that cost him the end of his season. Mark Vientos spent pretty much the entire year in AAA until he got his cup of coffee in the big leagues as a September call-up. He had an 877 OPS in AAA, 24 home runs in 101 games played. Meanwhile, Ronnie Mauricio no longer ranked because he posted a 767 OPS in AA and never earned a promotion. Going into 2023, Francisco Alvarez was the guy, but Brett Baty was not that far off. And remember, Brett Baty had a huge spring training and a great start in AAA in the first week. It might have been like 10 days that he spent in AAA before the Mets promoted him. He was the first one up. Everyone thought that Brett Baty had leapfrogged for sure Vientos and Mauricio, but maybe didn't leapfrog Alvarez as a prospect, but just when it came to impact in 2023, we thought Brett Baty was going to have more of an impact. He clearly did not. 2023 season, after the struggles of Baty and Vientos when he got his limited chances, we were looking at Francisco Alvarez as the guy clearly. And again, Ronnie Mauricio, he saw his stock skyrocket because he had a big season in 2023, playing in AAA for pretty much the whole year before finally getting his call in September and doing some good things. The reason why I break down just the peaks and valleys of these guys is because it really is so hard to predict what's going to come next. Now that we've seen some big league sample, one thing is clear. There's two guys of this group of four that have a long-term future at the New York Mets. Two guys that will be in the lineup on opening day. And that's Mark Vientos and Francisco Alvarez. And when you think about prospects, how often do all four hit? Could be a very real chance that of this wave of former top prospects, those are the only two that make a long-term impact on the New York Mets. And if that's the case, the question now is, which one will actually have the better Mets career? I want to talk about that in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. GameTime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And GameTime Picks is their feature that'll make it easier to get tickets to your favorite live events because they're going to filter out the fluff and show you only incredible deals on great seats. So to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets, you can also toggle the all-in pricing feature so you don't have to be surprised by fees when you get to checkout. They're all showed for you there. That's what the all-in price is. And also, you can view your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. And Game Time is the place to go for last-minute tickets. They sell tickets up to an hour after the game starts. If you want to go to a basketball game right now, a concert, whatever it is, download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks in the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can even suggest a topic for the show, and that is what today's show is all about. I've had an insider texting me back and forth about the idea of doing a Baby Mets episode for weeks now. So here it is. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider and maybe, impact the content you're going to watch on this show, make sure you find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. All right, so looking at Mark Vientos and Francisco Alvarez. Right now, if you had to say who's going to have the better career, it's Mark Vientos because he's coming off a fantastic season. Hit 27 home runs, drove in 71 in 111 games, throw in the 5 home runs and 14 RBIs he had in October, and that juices the stats to 32 homers, 85 RBIs in 124 games played. You add on 30 games. What, could you tack on 10 home runs? Could you tack on 25 RBIs? It is not outside the realm of possibility that Mark Vientos could clear 40 home runs this year and over 100 RBIs. And I'll tell you what, for years, going back to 2021, where the top prospect outlets were not ranking Mark Vientos, but I had watched all these minor league videos of this guy mishitting baseballs and somehow hitting them out. And just thinking about it, his power is insane. I have talked about the 40 home run potential that Mark Vientos had. What I also, though, said frequently was that he probably was going to have to be a DH or a first baseman. I didn't necessarily believe in his glove. I mean, there are some clips, if you go back in the archive of Locked On Mets, where I did wonder, hey, if he got a full off season to work at third base, could he ever figure it out? He did, though. He actually did. And yes, the defensive metrics were not great on Mark Vientos. He was -6 defensive run saved, -6 outs above average this past year. That's not good numbers. But that was over a pretty large sample size. And I think if you told me that Vientos was going to play over 100 games, largely starting most of them at third base, I probably would have thought those defensive metrics would have been more alarming. And even further, sometimes we get too carried away by defensive metrics, WAR totals, all these different things. And yes, the numbers are important. And I know that the front office does value the numbers, but they also have other numbers that they look at that we don't even know about. They have different ways that they evaluate defense. And the bottom line for me when watching Mark Vientos this past year is, for the most part, when the ball was hit to him, he was able to make the play. Now, I think coming in on the ball a couple times, maybe not a strong suit for him. He doesn't have a ton of range, but he's got a cannon of an arm. And I really do think if he ends up being the Mets' third baseman of the future, if they lock up first base with another guy and they are thinking of Vientos at the hot corner, I think he will be a top 10 third baseman in baseball for the next 5 years. I really think he can do that because we're going through our rankings at Just Baseball right now. I know I have Mark Vientos in the top 10. I don't remember how high I put him in the top 10, but I know I put him in the top 10. And I'm sure other people that are voting on this for our site are going to see it in a similar light. I really do. I think Mark Vientos has really established himself in that way. If you look at a lot of the offensive metrics, he was top 5 hitter at the position last year. You can even make the case he was a top 3. I'm looking right now to see. I had Vientos 7th in my third base rankings. I had Jose Ramirez, Austin Riley, Rafael Devers, Matt Chapman, Manny Machado, and Alex Bregman ahead of Mark Vientos. But I had Vientos right there at number 7. And not going to give other people's rankings away, but of the 2 other ones that I've seen listed so far, both of them have Vientos in the top 10 as well. I am currently the high man on these rankings. But Vientos is now the higher floor player of him or Francisco Alvarez. But because of the position that Alvarez plays, there is a ceiling that does supersede what Vientos could eventually get to, because Francisco Alvarez, I still am holding out hope that he can become the best catcher in baseball. Now, you got William Contreras, you got Adley Rutschman, you got Cal Raleigh, who I think is criminally underrated. But Alvarez has the ability, and he's shown a lot of chops of being an above-average defensive catcher, and there is still that offensive game. I don't want to give up on Alvarez after 2 seasons when he's still only, what is he, turning 23 years old? Yeah, he's only 23 years old, turned 23, I believe in November, if I'm not mistaken. Francisco Alvarez played 100 games this past season. He hit 237, 307 on base, 403 slug. Now, when you look at his numbers, what's interesting is he did have a thumb injury in April. He came back red hot. In June, in 2024, Francisco Alvarez hit 375, 456 on base, 667 slug, a 1.123 OPS. Then he had a 2-month slump in June and July where he OPS well under 600, bounced back in September, had an OPS of an even 900, hit 5 home runs. A lot of ups and downs throughout his career so far. I was very impressed with the way Mark Vientos was able to stop those slumps last year, because traditionally in the past, he's been a streaky hitter as well, but he really was able to just stay on it, and he might have a dip for a week, and then he'd be right back up. I think Francisco Alvarez has the potential to hit for a higher average than Mark Vientos and get on base at a better clip. And you look at the slug, it can be there. It can. If you look at home runs per game, which is not a stat that they calculate anywhere, but what I did is I looked at the professional career, Mark Vientos and Francisco Alvarez. I took their home runs that they've hit across their entire professional career. I divided by games played. Would you know that Francisco Alvarez has a slightly better home run per game rate? It was 19.95%. Vientos, 19.56%. So both of them throughout their careers have homered like 1 in every 5 games, about 20% of the time. So, yes, Vientos showcased more power this past season. 27 home runs in 111 games, and then he popped, the 5 more in October. But Francisco Alvarez had 25 home runs in 2023. Not that long ago, where he did that in the big leagues. And if you look at their careers, here's what I'll say. Mark Vientos has had a lot more time to develop as a hitter. He's a couple years older. He's 25. He's played significantly more games. He's played 690 games in his professional career. Alvarez, 491. Plate appearances, Vientos, 2,833. Alvarez, 1,897. And then in AAA, highest level, Mark Vientos got 204 games played, which in retrospect, they wasted a lot of Vientos in AAA. They should have just given him the run in the big leagues starting in 2022, quite honestly. But just even in 2023, finally he got his chance and he made the most of it. Francisco Alvarez only played 49 games in AAA. So I look at these two guys and you think about the responsibility that Francisco Alvarez has. He's got to lead the pitching staff. That is not an easy task. He has a lot on his plate with that. You can't focus on the bat as much. Now, Mark Vientos, he had to improve his defense as well. So I don't want to make it seem like he has no burden on the defensive side of the ball unless everything breaks right and one of the other young players establishes themselves at third base this year. And we'll talk about those two guys in the next segment. And the Mets sign Alonso, and all of a sudden Vientos is a DH. He still has to contribute defensively. He still has to work on his game. But I do think that it is an easier lift for him offensively than it is for Alvarez to get up to his potential. But I will say that Francisco Alvarez has the potential to be just as good of an offensive player as Mark Vientos. Do I think he'll ever quite get there? I think that burden of catching will always make him a step below Vientos offensively, especially because if he's catching, he's probably not going to play 150 games unless he is so standout elite offensively that they are carving out DH off days for him. I'd imagine that Francisco Alvarez is going to stay, at best in that 130 games played range, and likely probably a little bit more than that if you suffer any injury throughout the season. Vientos should be playing at this point 150 or more games every single year as long as he's healthy. So his numbers are always going to be a little bit better because he's going to play more games. So the power number should be there a little bit more. And then again, just overall, I think the grind of catching is going to make it tougher for Francisco Alvarez to sort of match that offensive output of Mark Vientos. But I don't see any reason why, when you look at their careers, these guys could both become all-stars. I think that is potentially in the cards. I think right now, presently, they are both top 10 at their respective positions. I really do. So when you look at who's going to be better, I really don't know at this time. I would say due to the importance of the catcher position, you would hope that Francisco Alvarez, who was the top prospect in the Mets system every single year from 2021 until he graduated, the only exception, remember, was 2020 when Ronnie Mauricio was ahead of him. I hope that Alvarez does fulfill that promise and he ends up being the better player, but I don't want there to be a big gap there because I hope Vientos can build on what he did in 2024 and continue to produce at that level as one of the top 3 or 4 offensive third basemen in the game. And if those two guys can become all-stars, along with having these high-priced superstars on your books with Juan Soto and Francisco Lindor, and of course, a steady veteran in a Brandon Nimmo, that's the core of this team that should be driving things pretty much until we get to 2030, or at least for a large portion of the 2020s. So I think the future is very bright with these two young players. And again, when you talk about waves of prospects, how often do you get more than 2 out of a crop of 5 or 6 guys even? It's not often that you develop more than 1 or 2 stars that hit and thrive in the big leagues and carve out everyday roles and stay in those roles year over year over year. Look at my lifetime as a Mets fan. Let's just say everything from 2000 on. The only time when the Mets developed two players that were perennial all-stars. Across this whole entire wave, really. Actually, I guess there's two sets that you could talk about. One is the obvious one. We talked about him a lot on yesterday's show, David Wright and Jose Reyes. The other technical group that you could say multi-time all-stars, Pete Alonso and Jeff McNeil. But that's a big dip from David Wright, Jose Reyes. And I guess to the Mets' credit, well, actually, I would say it was probably way before. I was about to include Nimmo with the Alonso McNeil group. But Nimmo came in a little bit before. It would have been more, Nimmo, Conforto, Wilmer Flores, and you sort of saw how that played out, right? Nimmo, probably the best player of that group. Conforto had his moments. He was better in the beginning. Flores has had some good seasons, but again, to get guys to be at that peak level of, the best players at their position, it's a rarity. So I honestly think anything you get beyond Alvarez and Vientos being consistent, well above average starters for you is absolute gravy. But there are a couple more baby Mets to discuss. So we'll talk about Ronnie Mauricio and Brett Beatty a little bit to close out the show, particularly Mauricio, because he hasn't gotten much shine on the show lately. So we'll go through all that in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, especially because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more all in one place. And it's not just football. You can bet on NBA action right now. Maybe you want to look at points, rebounds, and assists for your favorite star player. If they fill up the box score, you could take the over on that stat or on those stats and win big. You can also start to look at MLB futures. Maybe you want to throw some money on the Mets to win the World Series or to win the NL East. You can find all of that at FanDuel. And again, remember, if you just visit and join at FanDuel.com today, you can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Our next goal is to get to 12,000 subscribers. I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. All right, so Ronnie Mauricio should be back in the fold this year after missing all of last year with that torn ACL that he suffered playing Winter League ball going into last season. It'll be great to see him back on the field. That is for sure. Mets fans love them some Ronnie Mauricio. And I think I know why, because I experienced this, and apologies for the longtime listeners that have heard this story before, but during the summer of 2022, at the beginning of the summer, I took a trip and I went to each minor league affiliate. So I went to Brooklyn, I went to Binghamton, then I went to Syracuse. And at the time in Binghamton, you had Ronnie Mauricio, Francisco Alvarez, and Brett Beatty all there. Vientos was up in AAA. So I watched. I was really excited about that AA part of the trip because I could not wait to see Alvarez and Beatty. And for the longtime listeners of the show, I have had I've had some strong opinions against Mauricio throughout his minor league tenure. I just never quite saw it. That was from the videos that I could watch and just the stats overall. Get there in person. And Ronnie Mauricio absolutely blew me away. He, for one, just looks like a superstar. He has the size. He's such a huge athlete. When he makes contact, the ball goes a long way and it sounds different coming off his bat. I believe he homered, doubled, and hit a couple long fly balls in that game. I mean, every time he came up, he was hitting a rocket. He went and he caught a fly ball in the outfield where he made like this crazy run. There was a left fielder playing deep and he made this crazy catch running. I was just like, man, this guy, maybe he knew I was in the crowd and had heard some of the shade I'd thrown his way, and he let me have it. And I was absolutely blown away by what Ronnie Mauricio did in that game. But then the numbers came back, and you look at what he did throughout the season. I still wasn't as high on Mauricio, but it did change my opinion a little bit. And then 2023 comes around. Ronnie Mauricio has a great season in AAA. He hit 292. He got on base at a 346 clip. He slugged at a 506 clip. So overall, his OPS was 852. His best by far in years. The 2 years prior, I believe his OPS was exactly 696. So he had really struggled, honestly, but had a awesome season. Started stealing bases more efficiently than he ever had. Got over 20 there. He just looked like a new man. And so as the Mets season was winding to an end, he was the September call-up, and we got a September with Ronnie Mauricio. And I think what has continued to sort of keep Mauricio at the top of Mets fans' minds is I imagine everyone tuned in for that first week of Mauricio. And then you'd seen him and you probably sort of faded because that team, frankly, sucked. And so how much time are you going to spend on the 2023 New York Mets? And he came up to the show, had a 5-game hitting streak right away, stole 3 bases, looked great. You see the numbers when it was all said and done. 26 games, Mauricio hit 248, 296 on base, 347 slug, had only a 643 OPS. Now, this is a limited sample size. September call-up, 26 games. I'm not taking that sample and using it to make all of my judgments on Ronnie Mauricio. We saw 2023. There is an ability that he can tap into, and he has 5-tool upside. But if you really look at what he's done production-wise, is he a great hitter based on the hit tool? Not necessarily. Does he tap into his power enough for how much he should have based on the level of athlete that he is? Not necessarily. Is he a great defender at shortstop? No. Can he be a better defender at second base or third base? I definitely think he can be. Is he going to be well above average at either position? You can't say so because he has been a little bit error prone throughout his career. And I just can't say for sure he's going to be an elite defensive player. Compare him to Luis Angel Acuna. I have no questions about Acuna's defense. He can be an above average defensive shortstop, and he could be an elite defensive second baseman. He hasn't played much third, but I think he'd probably be able to handle the hot corner if the Mets put him there. We saw Louis Guillorme, who had spent most of his career up the middle. He played a fine third base when the Mets put him there. We saw Jose Iglesias this past year play a fine third base. A shortstop can play third in a pinch, and Acuna is a natural shortstop that could handle that. And he can even play some center field. So the difference there, Ronnie Mauricio never really got a ton of time in the outfield ever since 2022 when I saw him, because the Mets had Francisco Lindor, because at the time Jeff McNeil, you thought a little bit higher of him, because they had Jet Williams coming up along the way as well. And I guess after 2023, they had Acuna as well, right? I think starting in 2022, I dubbed Ronnie right field Ronnie, and I continued that throughout 2023. I feel like at some point, stick him in right field would have been something that might have been a better home for him because he could have, his arm could play up there. I just didn't see the long-term fit in the infield. Now, who knows? I mean, you have Juan Soto in right now, so who knows where Mauricio ends up landing. What I will say, ultimately, I don't have high hopes that Ronnie Mauricio is going to be a huge contributor for the New York Mets for years to come. The reason I say this, look at the Mets roster right now. You got Soto and Nimmo in the outfield. You got Vientos and Lindor in the infield. Alvarez behind the dish. That's 5 of your 9 spots in the starting lineup. That should be pretty set in stone for the next, let's just say, I think they have 4 years of control left of Vientos, if I'm not mistaken. So let's just call it that. Next 4 years, that's your team. 5 spots already taken. So there's 4 spots up for grabs. If Alonso gets re-signed, maybe it's only 3, but you have second base, center field, DH, and then either third or first, wherever Vientos ends up landing long term. Where does Mauricio factor in? Is it that second? Right now, I think I would take Acuna over Mauricio, just based on the defense. I have higher hopes that Acuna would stick on the big league roster more. Like going into camp, I think Acuna has a better shot to make the team, especially because Mauricio really just should spend at least a month getting everyday reps in AAA to just get his legs under him again. So that's one position. Center field, Mauricio's not going to be in center. Stick him in a corner, or your corner outfield spots are held down. Third base, potentially, but Vientos is there. So I just wonder where he's going to land. I think it's most likely a super utility role, and I just feel like Acuna is better suited to serve that role. Now, when it comes to Brett Beatty, his stock is as down as it's ever been. And if his stock was high enough in the league, he might have gotten traded at this point. But it's not. And I talked about him on a recent show, Why the Mets Should Hold. You can go back and listen to that. It was a full episode on Brett Beatty, trade or hold. I think the Mets at this point are best served holding on to him as major league depth. If he has a great season in AAA, he's on the big league club, maybe it improves his trade value slightly. I kind of doubt it, but I don't think he'll lose trade value if he ends up parked in AAA. But there's also a chance that he can be up in the big leagues and he could help the team right now. He certainly has more experience than Mauricio and Acuna, failing at the big league level, but at least seeing big league pitching, and maybe it finally comes together. When you look at Mauricio and Beatty, though, the one point that I want to hammer home, why was Beatty so much more highly regarded? Across Mauricio's minor league career, he's a 268 hitter. Across Beatty's, he's 283. Mauricio's on base in his career in the minors, 311. Beatty, 382. Slug for Mauricio, 443. Beatty, 507. OPS, 754 for Ronnie Mauricio, 889 for Brett Beatty. That is a 145-point difference in OPS across their minor league careers. And you look at the home run per game thing, right? Mauricio, 13.7% of his games. Beatty, 15.4. And that's factoring in Beatty's struggles in the big leagues as well. That's total professional games. Beatty learned how to play a good third base. Apparently, he was decent at second. I think going to camp, it is a three-man competition for a super utility role between Luis and Acuna, Brett Beatty, and Ronnie Mauricio. I think Mauricio is probably third on that list just because of missing last year. Long-term outlook, at this point, I think I'm highest on Acuna. I think he just fits. He fits as a super utility player in so many ways. And super utility guys, they're still going to get into 125 games, right? Guys are going to go down. And I think Acuna is perfect because he can be your backup shortstop. He could be your backup second baseman. He could be your starting second baseman. And then if something happens where you need him at short, you need him in center, you have another guy that can fill an easier position at second base. Technically, Mauricio does give you that infield versatility. He could play all three positions. But at this stage, I think I'm highest on Acuna just because I think what we're ultimately going to be talking about is sort of the equivalent of the sixth man in the NBA, the 10th man on your big league roster. The guy that's going to play a ton, but might not start on opening day. And I think Acuna is the best suited to serve that role. Beatty, I think right now is maybe the best suited to perform in 2025 just based on experience and age, but he hasn't yet up to this point. Mauricio is a wild card. He's an absolute wild card. But when you still have Jet Williams coming through your system, likely going to be in AA, if not AAA, soon next year, he could be up as soon as 2025. You have Drew Gilbert, an outfielder that also could have a 2025 ETA. You have Ryan Clifford, who spent a lot of time in AA last year. Outside possibility of 2025, more likely 2026 ETA. You have Carson Bench, a first-round draft pick that they just made that could fly through the system. I look at that group of four, and I have much higher hopes, probably because they're still prospects. But of the three that we're talking about with Mauricio, Beatty, and Acuna, that two of those four guys could grab the long-term spots. I think Jet Williams or Carson Bench, one of them will be the center fielder of the future. Drew Gilbert, I'm a little bit mixed on him, but I still think there's a chance that he could be, if nothing else, a really good fourth outfielder for the New York Mets. And Clifford's got the most pop in this system. So the Mets have a lot of different pieces that they're going to be cycling through over the next couple of years, and you'll find out which ones stick. Right now, today, there's two guys that are long-term fixtures for the New York Mets. That's Francisco Alvarez and Mark Vientos. And I would say Mauricio, to no fault of his own of missing a year, and Brett Beatty are getting to the point where they're maybe on their last legs with the organization. My guess is by the trade deadline, one of Beatty, Mauricio, or maybe even Acuna gets traded to another team for the Mets to get that deadline help. Whether they are good enough or viewed at a high enough regard at the time to be the main piece in a trade, or if they're just a sweetener, I think those guys are going to soon become sort of 40-man roster casualty. More Beatty and Mauricio on that front than Acuna, but especially Beatty, honestly. He's got one option left. He is verging on needing that change of scenery where he can latch on somewhere else. And I hope it doesn't happen, but I feel like he could be getting close to Brian Anderson territory. the guy that everyone talks themselves into at the beginning of each season. And maybe there's a year or a couple months where it connects, but the proof could be in the pudding when it's all said and done. But we'll see. I hope Brett Beatty can turn things around. I hope Ryan Mauricio can have a healthy season and prove me wrong. And I really do believe that Acuna is going to have a huge role in this team, coming off the bench, filling a lot of different needs for the New York Mets. We'll see how it all shakes out. But that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. Over the weekend, we got some major news. I will definitely record a show. Otherwise, I'll see you all on Monday. I appreciate all of you who continue to tune in every day. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel. It covers everything in the world of sports. Talking about Locked On Sports today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.